Okay, everyone, welcome to today's webinar as part of the PacTrans CSET Region 10 Transportation Conference. Thanks for joining us. Today's webinar is titled Innovative Technology Applications and Data Analysis for Safety Enhancement. Before we get started, I've got a few quick announcements. If you haven't had a chance to join us for the conference yet this year, basically, it started last Friday with an opening session, and then we have webinars each day this week on a variety of different topics in the mobility and safety arenas. Each activity has its own unique registration. There you can find more information about tomorrow's webinar on our conference website, pactransconference.com. You can also find recordings from Monday and Tuesday's webinars, as well as the opening session from last Friday. We have a virtual poster session on the website as well, and some announcements for some annual awards that we give out. So please, as you have time, hop on the pactransconference.com website and check out the other activities that are going on around this conference. Specifically for today's webinar, for those who haven't used Zoom, I can't imagine there are many, but for those who have not, you'll see on the bottom of your screen two icons. There's a chat icon and there's a Q&A icon. So on the chat icon, if you need to communicate with myself or any of the other panelists, you can do so. As you have questions during the presentations, you can put those in the Q&A panel. And if you see questions in that Q&A panel that you like, you can click the thumbs up to upvote them. I believe we will save the majority of questions until the end, unless someone has a very specific question to one of the presentations. Perhaps we can take those directly following that presentation. But I think that's probably enough from me. So now I would like to introduce today's session organizer and moderator. Guohui Zhang is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Guohui, welcome.
Okay, thanks, Carl. Hello, everyone. My name is Guohui Zhang. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at University of Hawaii. It's my great pleasure to chair today's session. This session actually will be very interesting, and it's characterized by four very interesting, attractive presentations to highlight the technology application and data analysis to improve the traffic safety performance, including the V2X technology-enabled advanced weather monitoring system for safety performance improvement, the safety performance correlation with the travel pattern and perceptions during the COVID-19 pandemic, heavy vehicle parking lot stripping configuration to improve their utilization rate and safety performance, as well as the bicycle vehicle safety analysis along the roadway at intersections. So we are lucky enough to have those presentations, and our presenters has different backgrounds from different domains. We appreciate they share their latest understanding the project progress regarding those interesting topics. So let's get started with our first presentation from experts in intelligent transportation system and connected vehicle technology domain, Peter Ashley. Let me briefly introduce Peter. Peter earned his Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering, and he is currently the Vice President of Business Development at Applied Information. Applied Information is a high-tech company, have lots of innovative technologies in connected vehicle application domain. And Peter has over 10 years worldwide experience in ITS business, where he worked in 3 different countries. And he is a global expert in connected vehicle technology, smart city applications. Today, he's going to share with us his very interesting project using the advanced weather monitoring system and to save lives. So Peter, please.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name's Peter Ashley. I'm the Vice President of Applied Information. And today we're going to be talking about connected vehicle technology in weather applications. So a lot of those kind of things are areas, a lot of people have heard about connected vehicles, but you haven't heard about, I just want to check, the moderator, can you spotlight my video? Because it looks like I'm not coming up as the main video there.
You are on our end.
Sorry?
You are on our
perfect,
end.
Perfect. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so what we're going to do is, everybody's heard about traffic signals and how they do connected vehicle information. Well, how do you do that with weather systems? How do you bring in flood warning systems? Because those are also part of connected vehicles and areas that we can really use to improve lives and save lives, using this technology. So I've got a couple of slides and things like that I'm going to show you guys. So we're going to go over here and jump into a little bit of a couple of presentation slides over here. So a bit of background, applied information. We're in about 650 cities. It's actually about 25,000 devices, and we're about 80 employees. And the main things that we do is school zones, connected intersections, emergency vehicles, and then connected vehicle technology. So we're really talking about that last bucket right now. And the whole idea is, how do you get connected vehicles into the hands of citizens today when most cars don't support this technology? We took a little bit of a different approach. What we did was we created a smartphone application that allows anyone to download connected vehicle technology and run it over their smartphone. If they've got the more advanced radios, RSUs and OBUs, they can connect the app to those as well. But this allows anyone in the public to utilize it. So it's a lot more wider deployed than when you have to use, a third-party modem in the car. So it just got the technology out there a lot faster. So, to give everyone a bit of an idea of, what do we mean by this technology? How does it work? What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and I'm going to show a short video on the Travel Safely app. And this is a global video on it. So you'll see what we're talking about. And then I'm going to jump into some of the applications that we can utilize for the weather situations.
Meet Travel Safely, an app that helps you get where you're going safely. Travel Safely works if you're driving, walking, biking, wheeling, scooting, or skating. Get real-time audio notifications.
Red light.
So you can focus on your surroundings. Get notified when you're approaching a red light, or when it's time to get ready for green.
Get ready for green.
Travel Safely works with local emergency vehicles, helping them respond to calls faster. Get notified when an emergency vehicle is approaching,
Emergency vehicle front.
or when to share the road with your two-wheeled friends.
Cyclist. Vehicle approaching cyclist.
Travel Safely tells you when you're passing a school or work zone, and if you need to slow it down. So whether you're on the road or just crossing,
Pedestrian.
every time you open Travel Safely, you're helping make a better commuting experience for all of us. Together. Download the Travel Safely app today and join our community of users committed to making our roads safer.
So you can see that, the whole idea behind that, you can see it's mainly city applications. And that's kind of been the focus for most people. And that's where we started with all the connected vehicle technology, is how do you get into traffic signals and school zones and work zones and so on. But then the question is, what do you do to, to get it into other types of devices that are used? So, devices like roadwork areas that you want to provide a work zone warning, or for instance, dynamic message signs where you can put up messages that there's wet roads ahead or any kind of message ahead. What this allows you to do is enunciate any kind of message you want to a roadway user. So we implemented this in a project in District 2 in Florida. And what it does is it enunciates the messages that are on dynamic message signs. So a lot of times, depending on where you are, there are weather warnings on these dynamic message signs, but also as you can think about it, whatever you could type on a dynamic message sign could be an audible message to a user. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like so you can get a better idea of what a dynamic message sign would look like on a smartphone application.
Input from our partners, local agencies, they had utilized some of the applied information technology for school zones, and that garnered our interest in what else could we do with it. As the years passed and you enhanced your technology, we realized, hey, we have certain opportunities here that
and this
we
is
haven't
Pete
realized
Vega, by
yet.
the way.
You made yourself available to share, the source code and stuff like that, so we can get it out to a larger market. You're kind of staying ahead of the curve as far as what we've encountered.
But you've also kicked off a project which I think is probably the first project in the United States to actually enunciate electronic message signs to people in their vehicles.
An alert driver can avoid a crash.
We have 100 or more dynamic message signs, and if we can instantaneously collect that information, share it, and put it on the signs, then we reached a larger part of the market.
That's why I see District 2 is absolutely one of the leaders in connected vehicles.
So you can see that's kind of utilizing the information that's available and the current procedures that are there. So that allows you to actually go out to different people, and if you're DOT with dynamic message signs, you can create another dynamic message sign that you can put out all of these different types of warnings. But there's a number of different areas. So we've been working with Washington County, and they've implemented some really interesting projects. What I wanted to show you was some of the projects that they're utilizing, where what we're doing is also using this connected vehicle technology to warn people ahead of time through the smartphone application, but also provide safety for every single person on the roadway. So like everything that we do, it's a lot easier if I explain something with a short video. So I'm going to play a short little video over here that's going to show you exactly what Washington County did. And a big shout out to John Fasana, who created, and he's the brainchild of most of these solutions.
We wanted to install a system that would allow for remote monitoring and make our closure process more efficient. We decided to use the same platform as the school flasher system. It was able to meet our basic operational objectives. For one, there's a water depth sensor, some gate status relays, LED flashers, and cameras. And the system basically monitors itself with the water depth sensor, and it sends out an email alert to staff when water levels reach a user-defined threshold. When they do finally make the determination to close the road, a crew's sent out, go close and lock the gates. This activates the flashing beacons, which then alerts drivers of the closure. Every 30 minutes or so, the snapshot in the upper right hand is refreshed, as well as all the values on system voltages, the water level, and the gate status. You can see basically we're able to gain efficiencies by removing these cyclical processes of sending crews out multiple times. So you see again, we've been able to save the county money, we're providing good traveler information, and all this goes a long ways building support and goodwill towards our ITS program.
So you can see that's utilizing the same kind of technology to measure the water on the roadway, and then to broadcast those messages out via either flashing beacons using connected vehicle technology, or actually sending that information out over a smartphone message to the roadway user. Now, they did a couple of other things which are really cool in the county there. One of the other really interesting projects was they did a project that utilized, they had a very dangerous curve, and when the weather was bad, the grip level on the roadway would decrease, and that would be one of their problems. So I'm going to show you exactly what they did there, which is very, very interesting. The next thing we're going to talk about is curve warning systems.
Slow down, curve ahead.
How did this thing actually work?
We're actually using weather telemetry to figure out, should we lower the road speed and warn you about what's going on? So this one actually takes two of our devices again. It takes the FMU and a school beacon to determine the conditions on the road. Is it wet? Is it icy? Dampness and all that kind of factors to give you your traction. And then based on that, it's lowering the speeds on the beacon that's connected to a radar sign to give you feedback to let you know you should be driving a little slower because it is slippery around a tight corner.
There's a driver feedback sign there, and that's what they actually lowering the speed and flashing and warning people that it's more dangerous now.
Right.
So you can see this is utilizing all that same connected vehicle technology in a weather application to take weather sensors that are looking at the grip level on the roadway and then warning people of a dangerous situation ahead for that sharp curve. Or if it's a bridge, icy bridge that comes over. The last one that I was going to show you, because I've only got about 1 minute left, is on snow zones. Another application that's, in terms of how do you get the message out to people that they need to put chains on their tires, and doing it in a very easy way.
So now going into the snow zones. These snow zones, they were originally put in with static signs in 2017. It only took us one winter season with these, realize that sitting a person out to have to climb a ladder, unlock these signs and flip them at 8 different locations in an ice or snowstorm was not a great long-term solution. Now it allows an operator to basically remotely monitor and activate these beacons from a workstation with the click of a button. Each of these locations, they're equipped with a camera. You see it in the upper right. They've got a battery backup system, and they provide voltage monitoring with alerts for switch over to battery backup or for low battery voltage. This basically is showing the direct staff time savings between the old activation process and the new process.
And that shows that it's a 98% improvement in time savings that you guys made by doing that project, which is insane.
So once again, we're able to save the county money, providing good traveler information. This is all going a long ways towards building support and goodwill towards our ITS program here in Washington County.
So you can see from all of those different applications, connected vehicles is really becoming a reality now, and utilizing the smartphone as a method of pushing that information out to the roadway users, or when the DSRC or now CV2X radios are more fully deployed, we can push that same information out over those platforms directly to the vehicles. So it gives you a two-way method of communicating that information to roadway users, either over the smartphone, which also then connects them as a cyclist or pedestrian, and through the car systems once the CV2X is deployed on all of them. So I know my time's up, so I want to thank you all and look forward to the panel discussion at the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. I think this is a really dynamic, interesting, informative presentations. We appreciate all your introduction to those advanced V2X applications. I think certainly we will have lots of questions at the end of at the end of these sessions. So we try to keep each presentation within 20 minutes, and then we reserve 10 minutes for panel discussions at the end of the sessions. So let me introduce our second speaker, Dr. David Yang. David earned his bachelor, master, and PhD degree in civil engineering from Purdue University. He is executive director of AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety now, and he also oversees day-to-day operations for these non-profit research education organizations. And previously, David was with Federal Highway Administration, U.S. Department of Transportation. He has co-authored many peer-reviewed journal papers, conference papers, and government reports on the safety topics using the technology, automation, engineering, and traffic operation and planning techniques to address the problem we have to face on a daily basis in our transportation system. So David, please.
Thank you, Guohui. Let me share my screen and then I'll do the presentation mode. So hopefully I'll be able to see my presentation. Let's go. All right, good. Well, thank you so much again for inviting me to be part of the PacTrans annual conference. And what I would like to do is really spend the next 20 minutes to tell you a little bit about the travel pattern and crash, share with you some of the crash statistics of what happened to the United States during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also, what are some of the these resultant findings telling us about how we should be working on our transportation system to continue to improve traffic safety issue and reduce crashes, and that could result in injury and death. So let me start a little bit about telling you about who we are at AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. We are a nonprofit organization that's located in Washington, D.C. We are actually, our office is 2 blocks away from the White House. And, we've been around since 1947. And I became the executive director at AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety at the end of 2016. And it has been very, very interesting kind of be able to kind of work on traffic safety problem and issue. And our work, basically, the tagline for AAA Foundation is saving lives through research and education. And we focus our traffic safety in 4 areas. One is emerging technology like connected and vehicle automation. One is on driver behavior performance, things like drowsy driving, distracted driving, impaired driving, roadway system, and driver, which is looking into basically that interaction and human factor issue related to roadway design and driver and vulnerable road user, including older driver, young driver, as well as other road users such as pedestrians. So what I'm going to focus on in today's presentation is really kind of use a combination of the data that has been published through some of the national databases from, for example, like organization like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, and some of the data we collected on our own. So let's look at some of the travel pattern first. And the first chart here kind of shows you the travel pattern here in the United States for the past basically 30 years or so, looking into it. And you can, one of the things I do want to highlight, and using my highlighter here, kind of point out, this is the data from 2020, basically the year of pandemic, where we have a reduction in travel in almost every state of US. But unfortunately, when you look at the total traffic safety compared to 2019 and some of the prior year, we actually, the number of fatality reported by NHTSA has actually went up for about over 2,000. What's even more concerning is the rate of the fatality. And, and this is basically over basically 100 million vehicle mile travel. And when you look at the rate compared just 2019 and some of the few prior year to 2020, the rate actually increased by 20% from 2019 to 2020 and has been the highest since 2006. So, and obviously this is something in the traffic safety community people has been pointing out. So what happened here, right? We have less number of people traveling on the road. We have open road. But we actually have an increase in the total number of reported traffic fatality, as well as the rate of the fatality. Let's look at another figure, kind of comparing the total. This is the raw number of the traffic fatality in various countries in 2019 versus 2020. And the 2019, and so when you look at this, is pretty much all the country when you have reduced travel because due to the fact of COVID, their total number of fatality actually went down. But there are some of the developing country, for example, like the UK, Japan, Sweden, France, all these countries number actually kind of went down. But when you look at these few countries, kind of go, wow, United States certainly is kind of jumping out. One of the things, kind of a key takeaway from this slide, you may think, wow, Iceland is really in bad shape. Well, the total number of traffic fatality occurred in Iceland in 2019 was 6 people. In 2020, they had 2 additional people die, 8 people. So that's a 2 people increase. But look at United States, that the sheer number of more than 2,500 people die, additional people die compared in 2020 compared to 2019, is really kind of telling you about issue related to traffic safety here in the United States. And when you look at basically the travel month throughout 2019 and 2020, in terms of when we break this down by month, you kind of look at issue kind of how the number of basically the rate has increased. Overall compared to 2019, the number of the rate of the fatality increased by about 7% in 2020. However, if you kind of further kind of break down and say, okay, let's look at the second half, which is from June to December of 2020 versus June to December 2019, you realize what we realize is there's actually a 13% increase. So one of the things that's really alarming is, if you recall, that's when the country, in many of the states and city under kind of stay-at-home order. So basically, you don't see a whole lot of traffic on the roadway. So what happened here? When you have less vehicle on the roadway, but yet you have a fairly high jump in terms of the rate of, in terms of the number of fatality, people die on the roadway. Again, this is some of the observation that we have seen. Again, let's look at the data, kind of comparing what happened since July of 2019 all the way to December of 2020. So when you look at this, is prior to COVID-19, that's about February of last year. I think basically what we see is the mean daily driving trip in the United States. This is based on AAA Foundation's New American Driving Survey, the data we collected through a daily survey we administer. And we see about 2 points on average, about 2.7 trip basically the US driver made on the daily basis in average. And then when we see basically from February to March, when we see states, governor and mayor begin to issue those kind of stay-at-home order and so forth, we see the rate drop basically in March, in April, and then you see a few rebound afterwards. But pretty much throughout is when you compare these number is kind of prior versus after COVID, you see basically a lower number of trips, about 20% below the normal level before compared to kind of before the pandemic. So this is something to keep in mind. What I've been saying is that throughout my message is you have less trips, but however, the fatality rate and total number of fatality has increased. But also another interesting data I want to kind of show you here. Again, this is based on our AAA Foundation's New American Driving Survey we collected throughout basically prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, and right now still collecting the data, is when you look at is the change of the average daily trip. Overall, we see about 17% drop. But when you break that down by driver age group, by income level, by trip purpose, you can kind of see that a lot of people basically reduce their trip, kind of commute from home to work trip. We see that people that has over 25K annual income per year, basically they reduce their trip more compared to people with income lower than that. But what's also interesting is when you look at the driver age group, you see basically people that's kind of working professionally, have some sort of work. They drop their overall trip decrease by about 18%. However, this young age group, young driver group, they have reduction, but the reduction is less. So that's a kind of overall travel pattern we have seen compared before and after, before and during the COVID. All right. So with that being said, I want to kind of move on next to some of the basically traffic safety challenge we are facing here in the United States. And this is, again, based on a separate survey we've done here at AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. It's called the Traffic Safety Culture Index. And all these information are available on AAA Foundation's website, which I'll provide you the website address afterwards. We survey people and we ask people about their risk perception, in the United States. Do you think that certain behavior, is extremely or very or extremely dangerous? And when you look at these numbers, is that overall really not a whole lot of change. And you would think, right? When you see less people on the road, when you see more open road, people may perceive overall the roadway system is safer. However, you see that basically from 2018, 19, 20, people's perception hasn't changed. And by the way, this data was collected in fall of 2020 during the pandemic. So people are actually kind of seeing less traffic on the road, but they still, their overall perception towards kind of certain behavior. And I have just shown a few examples. We have a lot more listed on our report is higher. And then, you kind of, we ask people, what's your perceived risk of, being caught by the police by, in certain behavior? And it is interesting to kind of see, people say, well, drinking and driving over the legal limit, people thought, well, when you compare it to the prior year, it's a little bit less, and driving with talking on the cell phone. However, look at this number here related to speed and speeding, is that driving over 15 hours over the speed limit on the freeway. People thought, when we survey people thought, well, I'm going to have a less chance getting caught in 2020 versus 2018 and 2019. So I think that's an interesting observation, and I want you to keep that in mind and move on to the next slide. When we ask people, well, of all these so-called, what we define as dangerous behavior, how many of you have done it in the past 30 days? In the past 30 days. And when you look at this is, and again, look at cell phone, look at alcohol use, they have dropped. And I think one of the reasons that caused these drop, sometimes from cell phone, for example, from 52% to 43% to 37% was because the exposure, because people are not many people are on the road compared to the previous year. But look at speed again. Speeding is that this number, even though it has dropped, but hasn't really dropped significantly. So this got us really, interested in trying to figure out, okay, is that one of the reasons that causing all this, these additional fatality and also increase of fatality rate? So the AAA Foundation staff did additional analysis using the Traffic Safety Culture Index data, and we did additional analytics, try to understand better about, exactly what happened, about who are the one that's kind of driving more, that's kind of causing the issue potentially that's related to traffic safety. And when we survey people, and you can see that, over 60, basically 60% said, well, we drive less compared to the previous year. Only 4% of people indicate they drove more in 2020 compared to the previous year. And that 4%, when we did additional analysis, we find that they are predominantly younger male. And as you may have known that in many studies that has done in the past is that age group is considered as a fairly high risk age group. Basically, people in that age group has a higher propensity to text and drive, to do speeding, running red light, and so forth and so forth. Of the 60% who decrease the driving, they are more kind of safer driver, older driver, female driver, who, people who are always more likely kind of wearing their seatbelt when they drive. So these behavior really is, I think, is telling us really something for us to kind of think about as a group as we move forward is, okay, we are getting less traffic, less car, less vehicle on the roadway. However, we see an opposite effect that we actually see an increase with additional, fatality that's on the roadway. And what we found is that, and this is going to be a paper that will be presented by some of the AAA Foundation researcher in the 2022 Transportation Research Board annual meeting. To share more detail about the finding, but we did find that we see that small group of increase from people driving more tend to be, a subset of the driver population that has a higher tendency to be engaging in some of the more dangerous driving behavior. So, what are some of the implications, from the data I have just presented? I think that's something we really need to kind of begin to kind of thinking through. As you know that we have also the driver, also the road user on the roadway. We have different behavior. When we tell people, distracted driving can be dangerous, and they can cause, that can lead to traffic crashes and death. That's definitely true. But in order to, in addition to the distracted driver, you also have distracted cyclist, distracted pedestrian as well. So I think one of the area we need to work on is really continue to think about new method. We can educate, we can train road user and modify their behavior. I think that's very, very important. Earlier, the previous presenter, my panelist, Peter, has mentioned about some of the technology they are using. I think those information are very, could be very useful. But how do we package and, use those information, provide warning so that we can hopefully modify and encourage driver to adapt to a safe driving behavior? I think that's one of the key areas we need to continue to work on as a country. I think another area that I want to, for us to kind of think about is we need to continue to really think about what are some of the innovative approach on transportation infrastructure. There's a lot of potential, a lot of promises about being able to use the new, basically new technology related to connected and vehicle automation to hopefully reduce traffic crashes. But keep in mind, we are only at the very beginning of that phase of eventually moving to a day when we have most of the vehicle will be automated. We are in that in-between stage. And I think there's a lot of work that need to be done, not only on the vehicle technology side, but how do you design the infrastructure of our transportation so they are more robust. They'll be able to kind of accommodate the driver behavior and so forth. For example, what I have seen, what I've shown here, this is, some of the, a concept about safe system. That's one of the things, basically, people need to kind of look into, and kind of consider. So my last slide here is really just kind of show is, besides that, I think we also need to have a systematic approach to deploy vehicle technology. Some of the example I've shown here is in a very recently, the Congressional Research Service provide a 3-page writing about the dangers if we don't do things correctly. Basically, we could be putting a lot of people on jeopardy because of the fact that many of these tech company, they could be kind of doing experiment on the public roadway. Last year, we actually AAA Foundation in 2019 we published a report, on looking into how certain when you package depending on how you package information, when you put emphasis on certain thing, driver could have a different understanding and expectation about some of these vehicle technology. I believe that vehicle technology will be able to help us to improve traffic safety, but we need to do it systematically so that people can, kind of bring them along, so people understand the expected functionality and the proper way of using them. So that's my kind of quick 20 minutes talk to give you some thoughts. Many of the study I have mentioned in my presentation is available at AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety's website. And the website address there, if you Google AAA Foundation, you'll be able to kind of find us there. So with that, I'm going to stop my sharing my slide and then hand back the time to you, Guohui.
Thanks, David. Thanks for such a timely, informative presentations. So I know we have lots of questions related to transportation, COVID-19 correlations. Let's save all the questions at the end of the sessions. I would like to introduce our third speaker, Dr. Kevin Chang. And Kevin earned his undergraduate and graduate degree in civil engineering from University of Washington. He is currently associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at University of Idaho. His research interests include transportation safety, traffic operation, and transportation education. And previously, Kevin was a traffic engineer with King County Department of Transportation in Seattle, Washington. He is a licensed professional engineer in Washington, Idaho, and California. Today, Kevin is going to deliver a presentation regarding public receptions of bicycle stop law. Kevin, please.
All right, Guohui, thank you very much. Let me get my presentation queued up here. And I want to thank PacTrans and also the Center for Safety, Equity, and Transportation for this opportunity to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about public perceptions of bicycle rolling stop laws. And so I heard both Peter and talking earlier about we've had a couple conversations about autonomous vehicles and the impact of COVID. And I think this topic is also there's a nexus of this topic to both of those previous aspects, in the sense that I know, speaking for myself, the pandemic has changed some of my personal behaviors, specifically from a mobility standpoint, getting out, walking more, bicycling more. I recently purchased a scooter, and we'll see whether or not that gets a lot of use here in the near future. So let me go ahead and continue with this presentation, which is a subset of a larger project that we're currently working on that focuses on bicycle rolling stop laws. And so I want to recognize my friends and colleagues who are part of this multi-institutional project. And they include both David Hurwitz from Oregon State University and Rhonda Young with Gonzaga. And many of you know them well. So bicycling at intersections, I want to introduce this topic by showing you a series of 3 pictures. And this is kind of a cliffhanger that I will provide an answer to at the very end of this presentation. So here in this first picture, this is a picture that I took. Those of you that are affiliated with the University of Washington in Seattle may recognize it. It's Boylston, it's just located just west of Interstate 5, That big concrete structure is the noise wall. And picture yourself as one of these bicyclists. You've approached the intersection, the light is green, and it looks like they're about to make a left turn. And so typical, common to a motor vehicle, you're going to determine when there is a safe gap that appears from the opposing traffic. And when you feel safe to do so on your bicycle, you're going to go ahead and complete that left turn maneuver. Now let me take you to Moscow, Idaho. You are now approaching the intersection. This is Line Street. You're heading north on Line Street, and you're about to approach the main arterial, which is the Moscow-Pullman Highway. And as you can see from the photo, the signal ahead of you is red. And my question is, are you allowed to proceed through the signal? Can you sort of look and see if there's a gap in the traffic? Can you go ahead and ride through that signal, even though the signal is displaying red? Alternately, what if you're going to make a right turn at this intersection? Can you sort of look to your left, and if you see not many cars approaching, or if you feel safe, can you go ahead and make that right turn without coming to a complete stop? Here's another photo also of Moscow, Idaho. This is near the fairgrounds. So you can see this is more of a residential neighborhood. And again, imagine yourself riding on a bicycle and you're approaching this intersection, which is stop controlled. As you pedal, as you get closer and closer to this intersection, if you don't see any cars approaching from either your left or your right, can you just go ahead and I'll use a kind of a common term, can you just kind of blow through the intersection without stopping? You know, what if one of Moscow's finest happens to be around the corner? Are you going to feel comfortable proceeding through that intersection, again, without stopping if you're on a bicycle? So what we're going to introduce as part of today's presentation is that the treatment at a signalized intersection, at a stop-controlled intersection, is in fact different depending on whether you live in the state of Idaho, Washington, or Oregon. So let me provide you with sort of the answer to the question that I posed, and I will repeat this slide here at the very end of my presentation. So it's very interesting. We call these bicycle rolling stops. And as you can see, the history of bicycle rolling stops, in fact, goes back almost 30 years in Idaho. One of the first states in the country to legally allow bicyclists to treat both stop signs and traffic signals as yield conditions. And this was a law that was passed back in 1982. Now, they amended the law 24 years later in 2006, where they, if a bicyclist approached a traffic signal, now they had to treat it as a stop, then yield condition, except if the bicyclist was making a right turn, in which case they could still slow down, look, and then if they felt safe and there wasn't a vehicle approaching, treat it as a yield condition and proceed through the intersection. Now, what's tangible to this study is that Oregon and Washington very, very recently passed their own versions of bicycle rolling stops. In the state of Oregon, in January of 2020, they passed a law that allowed bicyclists to treat stop signs and flashing red lights as a yield condition. And then 10 months later in the state of Washington, allowed bicyclists to treat stop signs as a yield condition. So Washington, as you can see there in my last bullet item, is the sixth state in the country to legalize bicycle rolling stops, joining the states of Idaho, Delaware, Colorado, Arkansas, and of course, Oregon. So for the purpose of this study, we were very, very curious in studying this concept, exploring how particularly Washington and Oregon are adapting to this. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is a multi-institutional project. And so David, Rhonda, and I have carved it out into sort of three main pieces. We have worked on developing a knowledge base, and I'll spend just a couple of minutes here talking about the expert interviews that we conducted. And this was a task that was led by Gonzaga University, Rhonda and several of her graduate students and undergrads. And then once we developed the knowledge base, we took that information and administered an online user survey. And I'm going to spend most of the time, the remainder of this time, talking about that, as that was the focus effort for the University of Idaho. So really trying to better understand perspectives from both bicyclists and motorists with regard to bicycle rolling stop laws, capturing their personal experiences. And then once we have all of this information, we're going to turn it over to David at Oregon State University. They, of course, have a driver and bicycle simulator, and they're going to be conducting some activities, testing the interactions, in fact, testing the simultaneous interactions between drivers and bicyclists at an intersection. So it's a very fascinating project, and you know, as we've been working on it and having regular meetings, we've been very surprised by some of the initial results that have appeared. I'm going to be talking about some of those here today. So for the interview portion, we developed a series of questions, and this is just a sampling of those questions. How often do you ride a bicycle? Why do you ride a bicycle? What are some of the safety factors that maybe you naturally or you know, sort of inherently think about when you're riding a bicycle? What are your perspectives or thoughts about the compliant, and perhaps you encounter more frequently the non-compliant behavior of both drivers and bicyclists? What are your thoughts about rolling stop laws? Are you familiar with those types of laws? What are your thoughts about what we call dead red laws? These are laws where the bicyclist can treat a traffic signal that displays the red indication as a stop sign. What are your perspectives? And then we had an opportunity, since we were going to be interviewing these folks before the survey, we wanted to ask them, you know, we're going to be conducting this online survey. Do you have any questions that you think would be beneficial to include as part of that online survey? And so here are some initial results. And again, Rhonda is currently in class, so I'm going to do my best to share the findings that they have initially come up with. And I know most of you are sitting in front of a computer, so the text is a little bit small, but hopefully you can magnify it as needed. So what we have here on this graphic is the responses that were provided by our interviewees. We interviewed 33 people total, and you can see that we've identified 5 broad categories of stakeholder types, and they're listed at the bottom of your screen, ranging from avid cyclists to people that don't bike at all, to emergency personnel, people that are involved with the legislative side of things. And based on the interview responses, we have captured 11 broad themes. And so you can imagine the interviews were conducted, we transcripted all of the information, and then using the deduce software that some of you may be familiar with, sort of identified how frequently or how often a particular theme was identified by a particular stakeholder group. So we've got the themes along the y-axis, the percentage of people that mentioned the particular theme, that's listed along the y-axis. So as an example, about 68–69% of our responders mentioned safety to some degree. Now, in this case, safety could have meant traffic safety, roadway safety, personal safety, but you can see that a large percentage was represented by, for example, law enforcement. They mentioned it on a frequent basis. That's that gray scale color. And then our legislative representatives, which represented about 20% of our sample population, they too had a large interest. You can see some of the other themes that were more popular than others. Theme number 5, the conflict between the motorist and the bicyclist, and then shifting over to 2 bars, theme number 7, the legalization of already occurring behaviors. And so this was one summary from our initial interviews. The second figure shows the same theme, but now we capture the rider types a little bit differently. And in my next slide, I'll briefly describe how these rider types are defined. But you can see we've got, for example, one category here is strong and fearless bicycle riders. And so what theme did they mention more frequently than others, you can see theme number 7 was most popular with them. Again, legalizing behaviors that they feel bicyclists already are participating in the field. And so these were some of the initial interview responses. We considered these as we were developing our online survey, and then we went through the process of actually administering the online survey. And so this is the section that the University of Idaho was tasked with. Very briefly, we developed our online survey, partnered with Qualtrics. As many of you know, they're an online survey and questionnaire company. So they helped us to administer this survey. We were able to gather 550 total responses across the 3 states. So again, Idaho, just over 150, Washington and Oregon, nearly 200 responses each. And as part of the survey, we wanted to ask folks, how would you characterize yourself as a bicycle rider? And we used this Geller scale. And so Roger Geller was a bicycle coordinator in Portland, Oregon, and he developed this scale a couple years ago. And so all of us would fall into one of these categories. We self-categorize ourselves as a strong and fearless bicycle rider. Perhaps we're enthusiastic and confident. Perhaps we're interested and maybe a little bit concerned or timid. And I suspect some of you out there would say, gosh, don't put me on a bicycle. Even if there's a dedicated pathway, that's just not for me. So those folks are classified as no way, no how. And you can see here for our sample population, again, a broad spectrum represented by each of those Geller categories. And then in order to differentiate between our bicyclists and non-bicyclists, we asked a question. And that question was, have you ridden a bicycle in the last 2 years? We administered this survey right during the pandemic. And so we wanted to make sure that we had enough of a time frame before the pandemic and all of the restrictions occurred. And so that was our criteria. And you can see that 325, about 59%, indicated that they had ridden a bicycle in the last 2 years. Obviously, the remaining 225%, or about 40% of our responders, indicated that they had not ridden a bicycle. Very briefly, just some more demographics. When you work with a company like Qualtrics, you do have the benefit of managing some of these quotas. And so, we were specific in asking that we had a kind of a nice separation with regard to age. You can see that in terms of gender, the female population was more sizable, more significant than our male responders. Race, not surprisingly for the 3 Pacific Northwest states, majority of folks, nearly 4 in 5, self-identified as either white or Caucasian. And you can see just about 5% representing both Hispanic and Latino and Asian and Pacific Islander. And then I think it's worth mentioning that we did have a question about household income. And for this survey pool, there was quite a sizable percentage that indicated that their household income was less than 50%, was less than 50,000, almost 48%. And you can see the other categories that are listed on your screen. So in terms of perceptions, I've got a series here of series of descriptive stats here that I'm going to walk through in my remaining time. We asked bicyclists, again, this is the 325 people out of the overall 550. We asked the bicyclists some general questions. Drivers are aware of me when I'm cycling. Do you agree or disagree with that? And you can see that in this survey, a majority of the bicyclists do feel that drivers are aware. There is a driver awareness component. We also asked a question, though, when I ride in the roadway, whether you're with or alongside vehicular traffic, do you feel safe? And here you can see that a majority of the bicyclists indicated that they did not feel safe, that they disagreed with that statement. And then we asked a series of questions about the bicycle rolling stop laws specifically. And I've got 2 slides here that look very similar. The first slide, as highlighted on the left there, focuses on our non-bicyclist population. And each row represents our 3 respective states. And so in summary, what this slide is saying is that most of our non-bicyclists have not heard of the bicycle rolling stop law, even though it's been in effect in Idaho here now for nearly 40 years, and of course in Oregon and Washington just under 2 years. But the numbers are quite significant, between 56 and 72%, depending on the state that you live in. And you can see that the responders that were very confident, really no more than about 1 in 5 in both Idaho and Oregon, and sadly in Washington State, which is where I live, we're down to just over 5% that have heard of the bicycle rolling stop law. Now, thankfully, when we polled our bicyclist population, the percentages were better, but still not particularly positive. 43% in Idaho, and then just about a quarter of the bicyclists in Oregon and Washington confidently answered yes, and then about another quarter responded by saying they've heard of it, but they're not quite sure what it means. So that's, again, of concern. The next series of slides, 3 slides, very similar, but for each of the states. So for my Oregon audience, this slide is for you. We asked a series of statements. Bicycle rolling stop laws would decrease conflict between bicyclists and motorists. Bicycle rolling stop laws would reduce the number of crashes between those two groups. Bicycle rolling stop laws would make bicyclists in my community feel more comfortable. And the last statement, the rolling stop laws would make motorists feel more comfortable. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but what I think you can see at first glance is there is a relatively even split across these statements. Most of the responders, as highlighted in bold, sort of, weren't quite sure which side of the fence they wanted to be on. They neither agreed nor disagreed with the statement. For the first 3 statements, Oregonians generally agreed or strongly agreed with the statement. And then when it came to whether bicycle rolling stop laws would make motorists feel more comfortable, you can see that about over a third of Oregonians disagreed or strongly disagreed with that statement after having a chance to respond to it in the survey. Now, my next slide is for the Washington community. And again, Washington passed this law 10 months after Oregon. And in a nutshell, the percentages are fairly similar. Washington percentages in the agree and strongly agree columns are higher across the board. And just as a recap, in Oregon, the agree and strongly agree, for example, for the first statement was around 31% total. In Washington, it's about 40%. Second statement was 33%. Here it's 35%, give or take. The third statement, bicyclists in my community would feel more comfortable. In Oregon, it was 38% total agree or strongly disagree. In Washington, it creeps up to about 47%. But again, you can see that there was a subset of the population that also either disagreed or strongly disagreed with each of these statements. And then I think it's interesting to also highlight the responses from Idaho. Again, bicycle rolling stop laws have been in the books for a much longer time. And you can see that here, again, the population is not unanimous or leaning very strongly toward one end of the spectrum or the other. So what does this all mean? I think to draw just a couple of initial conclusions, and again, our study is still in progress, is that public education, and David mentioned this in his presentation as well with regard to his topic, the education and knowledge for this particular topic is indeed lacking based on the initial results that we have seen. There's a lot more work that can certainly be done, not only educating the motoring public, but I think also outreach to our bicycle population in letting them know what you can or cannot do at an intersection. There are certainly opportunities for further assessment and assessing specifically the mobility safety trade-off in how it impacts both motorists and bicyclists. And what we have seen in our initial conversations is that there is tremendous widespread interest on this topic at the national level. California is one of the states that is exploring passage of a similar law, and we've gotten some calls from people throughout. As I mentioned earlier, there's only 6 states right now that have a rolling stop law on the books, and so there's 44 states to one degree or another that is considering something very similar. Some states are further along than others. You can expect a state like California to be further along than perhaps some of the states in maybe the deep south where bicycling isn't as prevalent. So let me come back to this slide, and I wanted to close with this one. Again, I shared with you these 2 photos. You're the bicyclist that's approaching these intersections. One is a signalized intersection displaying red. The second photo on the right is a stop-controlled intersection. What can you do, or what can you not do? And here's my cheat sheet. So if you're in Idaho, if these intersections are in Idaho, you can treat the traffic signal as a stop and then stop and then yield. So in fact, if you're proceeding through the intersection, the photo on the left, you can in fact stop, look both ways, and if you feel that the gap is sufficient for you to proceed through, you can sort of pedal real fast and then proceed through the intersection, even though that signal displays red. And if you're going to make a right turn at that signalized intersection, you in fact do not have to come to a complete stop. And then the photo on the right for any Idaho bicyclists, as you're pedaling along, if you look off to the left and to the right and you don't see any cars, you can in fact ride straight through the intersection without stopping. And then Oregon and Washington treating stop signs as a yield condition. So for the photo on the right, if you're an Idaho bicyclist, an Oregon bicyclist, or Washington bicyclist, you can now legally proceed through that intersection without coming to a complete stop. And so with that, I think that probably uses up most of my time. I want to thank PacTrans and CSET again for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Kevin. I think that this is a very interesting presentation. Certainly, I learned something new from your survey design, survey result. Thanks a lot. So we will have the question and answer sessions conducted at the end of this session. I would like to introduce our first speaker. So Helena Breuer. Helena got her bachelor and master degree from Virginia Tech, and she is a PhD student currently in civil engineering at Oregon State University. Her research interests focus on human factors in transportation. Specifically, she studied how traffic network elements are processed and their resulting effects in user decision-making process. Today, she's going to talk about the preliminary investigation of highway vehicle parking design. Helena, please.
Hi, thank you for having me. Let's see if I can share my screen. Hopefully that's being shared. Let's see. Can everyone see that? I'm hoping so. Let's see.
Yep, that's great.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to be presenting on a preliminary investigation of heavy vehicle parking design in Oregon rest areas. And this was done with my advisor, Dr. David Hurwitz, as a corresponding author, and also PI and co-PI, Sal Hernandez. All of us work at Oregon State University. As I was introduced as a graduate student here, I'm presenting on behalf of Dr. Hurwitz. Trying for the slide to move. Oh, there we go. Okay, so an introduction to the problem. So ODOT came to us with a problem, and they wanted to explore it in the heavy vehicle driving simulator that we have. And that's the lab that I work in, and Dr. David Hurwitz is the director of. And they want to explore a problem they've noticed over the past decade, and that is increased truck parking on interstate shoulders and ramps. And one would assume that because of this, or this is a result of over rest area parking or heavy vehicle rest area parking being over capacity or at capacity. However, that's not the case. It has been observed that there oftentimes when not, the heavy vehicle parking has been underutilized at rest areas. So the evidence that we have an E-roads map of the site that was actually selected by ODOT, which was the northbound Santiam rest area on I-5, located in Jefferson, Oregon. And to the right is a figure 1, and this is a geospatial distribution of parked heavy vehicles on the north and southbound Santiam rest areas. So the northbound is the one on the right, it's in the bottom right corner, and the southbound is on the left, a little bit north of that, and to the west. And each dot represents a truck that has been parked for more than 5 minutes. And this was from January to April of 2021. And so as you can see, there's a lot of trucks that have parked on the shoulder of the interstates after the entrance to the rest areas, and also on the entry and exit ramps of these rest areas as well. And in addition to that, ODOT also has had discussions with private trucking companies where they found out that these trucking companies advised their drivers to not park in the rest areas as they're at high risk for property damage incidents with other trucks and also passenger cars. So what are the implications of these heavy vehicles parking on the interstate and side of the roadways? First would be sight distance. This really does hinder all the sight distance of any surrounding or nearby driver. Next would be that these vehicles basically operate or act as a roadside object. So in the event of a run off the road accident with a vehicle, the injury severity of hitting a heavy vehicle increases. And then lastly, they would serve as obstacle to emergency vehicle operations in the event that the emergency vehicles need to use the shoulder or side of the roadway to access an incident. Having a parked commercial motor vehicle could make it impossible to get to the incident. And the relevance of this especially in COVID, is the transportation of goods. There's been an increased demand of commercial motor vehicle operations, especially on the interstate, due to the growing e-commerce markets. And I think that's been exacerbated and increasingly grown in the past year due to COVID. So the research question and scope. So the research question we explored was, how can lane striping of the heavy vehicle parking and rest areas be improved to increase utility of the parking lot? So given the scope of this project, we were looking at low-cost design alternatives. So at surface level, it was just going to be the striping. We didn't want to have to do anything with adding or removing pavement. So we were really just limited to the striping. So we have the 3 independent variables of interest that we explored. First would be the nearby passenger car parking, so the presence of adjacent passenger car parking. And then second would be the parking spot entrance angle. And then lastly, the number of parking spots and their width. So we have a methodology overview. I'll briefly go over this and then we'll get into detail with that in later slides. So first we did a site visit where we obtained measurements, aerial imagery and observations that we then could develop the existing conditions out of. And we also gave that to the design engineers at ODOT for them to develop the 2 design alternative striping plans. And from that, we took those 3 scenarios and developed them in the simulator. And then we put this we developed a workshop where we had truck drivers participate in testing out each of these scenarios, parking in each of these scenarios. And then following that was a debrief and discussion about their experience and their attitudes and behavior towards each of the scenarios. So first was the site visit. The purpose of this really was to just help us develop the existing conditions in the simulator design software. So we went out with a DJI Mavic Pro 2 drone, as pictured to the right, and iPhone cameras and measuring wheels to obtain data and measurements and aerial imagery, and also made empirical observations so we could accurately depict this in Blender, which is one of the design software programs that we use for the simulator. So here's some of the data that we obtained at the site visit. This was a lot geometrics. This is an aerial image that we took from our drone, and we annotated it with some of the measurements we took. Primarily, it was just the entrance width, or the width of the entrance parking aisle, as that varied greatly. And there are a lot of other measurements we took that aren't annotated on this. And then next, these are just 2 images that we took with the drone. Given the height restrictions of flying the drone, we couldn't take an image that captured the whole rest area, so we had to do it in parts, as you can see, split up between the 2. And then we also got a lot of ground level data. These are all, except for the bottom left photo, these are all screenshots from videos that we took at the ground level of truck drivers executing their parking maneuvers. As you can see in the top left photo and in the bottom right photo, these are 2 truck drivers having to execute an exit maneuver and encroaching upon the passenger car parking. That's the adjacent passenger car parking. As you can see in the bottom right photo, using almost all of the passenger car parking length. So that brings up concerns of, well, what if there were passenger cars parked there? How would they safely exit, or could they even exit? And then in the top middle photo, this is a picture of a truck executing the entrance maneuver and having to use the adjacent spot to its left to safely and successfully enter and park into the parking spot. So scenario development, after the site visit and developing the existing and design alternatives, we then worked in the simulated environment to design the existing conditions in Blender, which first we did the pavement. We designed the pavement, curbs, striping, and terrain. And then from this, we imported it into SimVista, where you can see in the top image, this is the translation of the Blender file into SimVista, where I added landscape features, buildings, parked vehicles, and any stationary items. And then through importing file libraries and back-end operational coding and calibration, this was then imported into the simulator and ready for testing. So the simulated scenarios, as I said before, we had the existing conditions and then the design alternatives 1 and 2. So what did those look like? And what do they look like in the simulator? How did we simulate them? So the existing conditions, the entrance parking angle was 33 degrees, and there were 12 parking spots, and we left the passenger car parking there, and it was around 30% occupied. And then for alternative 1, sorry, we kept the entrance angle at 33 degrees. However, we removed 1 parking spot, and of that 12th parking spot, we distributed its width across the remaining 11 spots. And then we left the passenger car parking striking in the design, but removed all the vehicles from the simulation. So it's as if it was not occupied at all. So effectively, the lengths of the parking spots stayed the same, whereas their width increased. And then for design alternative 2, the entrance angle increased to 45 degrees, and we kept the same number of spots as alternative 1, whereas we then removed the passenger car parking from the design. So effectively, the lengths of alternative 2 were less than that of the existing conditions, whereas the widths were greater than that of the existing conditions, but also equal to that of alternative 1. And then removing the passenger car parking allowed for greater horizontal clearance for exiting maneuvers. So here I'm going to show some just screenshots of each of the simulated environments. So this is of the existing conditions. As you can see, there are 12 parking spots. You have the adjacent passenger car parking at roughly 30% occupied. And then here is alternative number 1. So this is 1 spot removed with increased width, and then we kept the passenger car parking but didn't have any parked vehicles there. So they had that space to use on the exit maneuver. And then this is the design alternative number 2. And this is with the passenger car parking removed and the entrance angle increased. So from that, we then we executed a workshop, or hosted one, sorry. And this was located in our heavy vehicle simulator. It's on our campus, Oregon State University in Corvallis. And And we had the workshop was composed of 2 parts, I guess. The first would be the testing, that was around 40 minutes. And then after that, we had a debrief and discussion with each of the participants. The participant sample size was 4 drivers, and the requirements that we had were that they had their commercial driver's license and at least 1 year of experience. And then here's a picture of the ODOT design engineer who had worked with us on this project. He was executing one of the harder or most difficult parking maneuvers. So we had a bunch of different trials in the testing to simulate different difficulty levels of parking maneuvers. Let's see, so level 1, we had a low level occupancy. So this would be as if there were no other cars parked. It's when there were any 3 adjacent parking spots available. So there would be no truck either to the left or the right of them. And so this was the easiest of all parking maneuvers. So the 1 trial was spent doing this. And then the next trial, we asked participants to park in either spot 3 or 5. So this would simulate if it was at medium capacity or medium occupancy. So they just had to park adjacent to a truck. And most drivers actually chose spot 5. And then level 3 was the most difficult, and this would simulate if there were a lot had no 2 consecutive spots open, so parking in between 2 trucks. And as I said before, this is the most difficult. And so we had these 3 tasks for them for each of the design scenarios. So there are a total of 9 trials. And so after this, we had a debrief and discussion. I know a lot is on this slide, so I'll just try to summarize it. But the items we covered really were just the existing conditions, and it's covering if it's inadequate enough for truck drivers currently. And then the adequacy of that entrance parking aisle width and the respective clearance upon exit. Comparing the parking spot widths between each of the scenarios and that to the spot entry angles, and then also the impact of adjacent passenger car parking. And these are a bunch of sample questions that we had really just aimed to kind of better understand driver attitudes and behaviors and their stress levels, mostly when executing each level parking maneuver across the 3 scenarios. So the findings, we had some findings about the existing conditions. So first was the difficulty in driver stress in the medium. There was immense amount of difficulty in driver stress in the medium and high capacity scenarios. This was already known and kind of expected, but we were able to validate this through this study. The entrance angle was insufficient. It was too sharp for drivers. It was further exacerbated by the entrance aisle being too narrow. If you look back at the lot geometric slide, I think the minimum width was around 17.5 feet, which is, I think, it should be at least 20 feet or wider. So really having that plus that entrance angle being too sharp is really puts on a lot of stress for the drivers. Nextly, the widths are unacceptable for the medium and high capacity scenarios. And then lastly, the adjacent passenger car parking really does reduce that margin of error for the exit maneuvers, especially if there are cars parked there. So yeah. And then the next slide, we'll have the findings on the design alternatives. So we found through the discussion and debrief that the additional width is detectable, and each of the participants really appreciated that and found that to help mostly. In comparison to the entrance angle that we changed, most said that it was unnoticeable. So that was really interesting to us, as I thought it was going to be the vice versa. And then next, the passenger car parking, it was utilized in both alternatives as expected, but mostly more so in the second design alternative. And it allowed them to have a calmer turn to align themselves in the exit aisle as well. So findings, a summary of comments. So we were able to identify something called the setup. So many truck drivers or many participants identified or coined this term, the setup, that all truck drivers have to go through. or I guess it's kind of like a concept, but it's when aligning the truck into an entrance of a parking spot, if there's sufficient enough room on that entry aisle width and that angle is appropriate, it can be executed such that the exit maneuver is predictable and seamless. So that was just very interesting to hear that basically what they were saying is if they are able to set up their alignment properly, they won't have to worry about that exiting maneuver. However, if they mess up on the setup or don't correctly align, that exit maneuver is going to be a lot more stressful and complex than it would be if they appropriately set up their parking. Next will be the significance of the entry aisle width. All participants said that they would prefer there to be more width on the entrance aisle than that of the exit aisle, which further supports the setup concept. And then next would be to simulate additional components of the truck. So there are some limitations of the design of the heavy vehicle simulator that didn't visualize or show visuals of the rear wheel or the trailer or the hood. So providing those would increase spatial awareness and possibly help parking to bridge that gap of like any error that isn't necessarily translated from the real world parking versus to simulator parking. And lastly would be an alternative of removal of passenger car parking. One of the participants said that you could restripe the passenger car parking to be parallel. So if you need to have additional passenger car capacity, but don't want it at the cost of removing all of it, you could restripe it to be parallel. And so for the conclusions, we had 3 recommendations. First would be to increase the parking spot width to 14 to 17 feet, which I think was about 1 to 3 feet wider than it is currently. This would allow for a more comfortable margin of error in the parking maneuver, and then also accounts for any vehicles or heavy vehicles poorly aligned when they did the setup. Next would be to remove the passenger car parking, as I said previously, and possibly restripe it to parallel parking if needed. This allows for additional exit clearance and accounts for any trucks that are pulled too far in. And then lastly would be relocate the truck striping 10 to 15 feet south of where it is currently. This would allow for greater width, the entrance aisle width would be greater and allow for a better setup and allow for the exiting maneuver to be more predictable. So limitations and application. So some of the limitations, as I stated before, the absence of vehicle positioning cues, so not providing, or the design of the simulator doesn't show the rear wheel, the trailer, or the hood. And so that can impact how drivers behave or participants behave in the simulator. Next would be inflated perceptions of difficulty in initial tasks. So there was that adaptation period where drivers had to get comfortable with driving in the simulator. And so the initial task might have been perceived as more difficult than that of the latter. And so that could affect the results. And lastly, the repeated measures design of this experiment. Really, what comes from this is like the learning effect. And through the adaptation over multiple trials, since we had 9 trials, these drivers really learn how to operate and are more comfortable after just a few sessions or a few trials. So that could impact their performance. And then future applications will be a full-scale heavy vehicle parking study. As I stated in the intro slide, that was a preliminary investigation. So doing a full-scale heavy vehicle parking study would include using eye tracker, which are pictured to the right, galvanic skin response to analyze driver stress, and also an EEG that I think we just recently got that would look at neural activity in the brain based on blood flow. And then lastly, the use of a multi-simulator study. We have the passenger car and bicycle simulator as well. And these are all developed from the same company and they can integrate with one another. So we could have a driver, we could have a participant in each simulator interacting with each other in the same world. And yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank everyone.
Okay, great.
Thank you for the
Thank you very
opportunity.
much. Thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting parking lot design research. Thanks a lot for sharing it with us. Since we are running a little bit behind the schedule, probably I can only maybe go over one question for each speaker. So I do receive some interesting questions from our audience. The first question I have is for both David and Kevin. So about the different transportation mode usage under COVID-19. So for public transit buses use, I know, David, you do not cover this in your presentation. We expect there's a decreased usage of public transit buses under COVID-19. How to provide safe service for those satisfy public mobility needs through public transit buses under COVID-19.
So Guohui, I think, basically, yeah, we didn't collect data related to transit use during COVID-19, but there's actually other entity, for example, Apple, they had some data collection on how people kind of shift their mode and so forth. But all in all is at the 2021 TRB annual meeting, there was actually quite a few presentation basically looking at a very significant drop on the use of public transportation system. That including not only the buses, the metro system, but also I'm sure as people have seen, even the airline industry is still kind of recovering. I think one of the things that is that in order to kind of store that kind of consumer or the user confidence, I think one of the key thing is you need to continue, these public agencies need to basically provide assurance to the general public. I can tell you, I live in the Washington DC area, and one of the things is after CDC made an announcement that masks may not be necessary anymore, we see a drop on people who are wearing masks. But during the past several weeks, when I used the metro system a few times myself, on a daily basis, I see all but one user who's now wearing a mask after basically Washington Metro kind of made another mandate, said you need to wear a mask. I think that is that public trust and confidence need to be restored. So people will be able to kind of come back and say, yes, I feel comfortable. So,
thanks, David. I think the second part of the question is for Kevin. Under COVID-19, do you see increased use of bicycle? And when people feel uncomfortable or not safe enough to use the buses, how do you see they rely on more bicycle to satisfy their mobility needs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Guohui, and I don't have data, but I anecdotally in my conversations with friends and just observations have noticed that this is I think a very, very challenging time to assess personal behaviors and personal mobility, simply because so much is changing right now. And David alluded to that, in his example of Metro Transit. There are people that after COVID hit, obviously stayed at home, and now as places have opened up, they are being required to go back sort of to their old ways. And so there's a self-assessment process that individuals need to think about. There are other entities, I think, a lot of these tech companies, Amazon announced this not too long ago, where they are extending the stay-at-home policy for an indefinite amount of time. And that causes people, I think, really to rethink lifestyle. And, do they still need to live in a city? I think if you're staying at home more, it definitely encourages you to think about, what your mobility options are. If you are someone who no longer needs to be in the office all the time, I know that, just kind of speaking for myself, I'm thinking of, if I'm at home a lot, how do I get my exercise? How do I ensure that I'm still, not having, if I don't have to interact with people on a regular basis, what are some of the activities that you can engage in? And certainly walking outside, bicycling outside, become much more popular perhaps than they used to be. You know, I'm not an avid bicyclist by any means here on the Palouse here in a couple of weeks. There's going to be some snow and ice on the ground. And so, you know, for me, bicycling is not going to be an option for the next 3 or 4 months. On the other hand, I have colleagues at the University of Idaho that, you know, do bike in snow, in ice. And so I think there's a lot of, you know, again, personal assessment to determine where our mobility needs are going to be. And I think it's going to be changing here, certainly as 2021 ends and as we enter into 2022.
Great. So hopefully the COVID-19 situation become better. Thanks a lot for our speakers. I really appreciate your insightful presentation. Since we are running up late, so I do want to respect everyone's schedule. Maybe let's stop here. Cole, I will pass it to you and see if you have any final comments.
No, that's it for me, everyone. Thank you so much to our presenters, Peter, David, Kevin, and Lena. That was great. I'll just remind everybody that this is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube channel and on the conference website by the end of the day today. So if you have colleagues who you'd like to share this with, please pass that along to them. And thanks for joining. See everyone tomorrow.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.